The moment I saw her crying in the hospital corridor. 5 years of unbroken numbness inside me finally cracked. 5 years, for half a decade. I'd lived like a ghost trapped in my own body, walling off every emotion until grief, warmth and pain were all foreign to me. At 52, I was Marcus Reed, a tech mogul with a global business empire. My name adorned skyscrapers, my algorithms shaped industries, and wealth erased nearly every worldly trouble. I resided in a lavish Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, with a life grand enough to seem godlike, but I was no god, only a man who'd stopped living the day my wife Elena died. Elena, my everything, was a trauma surgeon who dedicated her life to mending broken people. 5 years ago, on our 7th wedding anniversary, she'd headed home ready to discuss starting a family. Ready to make our perfect life complete, she never arrived. A drunk driver ran a red light, barreling toward an unsuspecting family's car. Ever the healer, Elena swerved without hesitation, sacrificing herself to spare an entire family from fatal harm. Paramedics, newspapers and her hospital hailed her as a hero. Everyone told me I should be proud. No one told me how to survive the empty space she left behind. I'd existed in stasis ever since, working relentlessly, chasing empty success and profit that tasted like ash. I locked all my grief behind cold logic and wealth, becoming the unbreakable, unfeeling man the world expected. I'd believed nothing could ever break through my walls, until today. I'd come to St. Mary's Hospital to visit my business partner James Morrison, hospitalized after a mild heart attack. It was a routine, obligatory errand. After leaving his private room, I walked silently down the linoleum hallway, ready to retreat back to my empty, sterile life of success. Then I heard her. It was no loud, attention-grabbing cry, just quiet, muffled, desperate sobbing. The sound of someone who'd always grieved alone, determined never to be a burden. I turned. She sat alone in the pediatric waiting area, perched on a harsh plastic chair. Barely 20, with dark hair shielding her face, she buried her mouth in her hands, her shoulders trembling with suppressed tears. Dressed in faded hospital scrubs, she looked utterly fragile yet unshakably resolute. Even in her ruin, she was broken, devastatingly so, and impossibly beautiful because of it. I realized beauty was never perfection. It belonged to those who endured being shattered yet refused to fall. She was like cracked stained glass, scarred and fragile, yet still glowing beneath the light. I'd witnessed countless moments of grief in hospitals, donated millions to ease suffering, and watched strangers unravel. None of it had ever moved me, until her pain burrowed through my 5 years of walls and numbness, stirring a long-buried part of me I'd thought died with Elena before logic or self-preservation could stop me. I spoke. Excuse me. My voice came out rough and graveled, unused to casual words after years of cold business negotiations. I never spoke to strangers, never intruded on others' pain, but I could not look away. She lifted her head, and my world tilted. Her storm-gray eyes, red-rimmed from crying, blazed with sharp, fierce intelligence, flecked with molten gold like lightning through storm clouds. She studied me calmly, no shyness or fear, just the wary scrutiny of someone who'd learned to read people to survive. She took in my tailored suit, silver-threaded hair and luxury watch, seeing every inch of my wealth and detached power. I'm fine, she whispered, her voice cracked like thin ice. She straightened abruptly, swiping at her wet cheeks, embarrassed to have broken down in public. You don't have to pretend to care, she said, her tone turning cold and defensive. I recognized that armor instantly. It was the same one I'd worn for half a decade. I stepped closer, crossing the invisible line she'd set. I'm not pretending. The truth surprised me. For the first time in years, my actions stemmed from genuine desire, not obligation or charity. I simply wanted to sit with her grief. I sat on the hard plastic chair beside her, ignoring the vast 32-year age gap and the impropriety of the moment. The hospital's sterile chill faded, the hum of monitors and distant footsteps fading into silence. For a moment, only our quiet grief existed. I'm Marcus, I said. Holding out my hand, she hesitated briefly, then slipped her cold, trembling hand into my steady one. Her gaze flicked to my left ring finger, the simple gold band I'd never removed after Elena's funeral. Sophia, she replied softly. Sophia, I repeated, the name feeling unexpectedly precious. She let out a shaky, humorless laugh. I'm sorry you had to see me like this. I don't usually fall apart in public. Don't apologize, I said. Sometimes life demands more strength than we have. Her gray eyes locked on mine, wary yet curious. You sound like you know that firsthand. More than I'd ever wished to. With her, I was no untouchable billionaire, only another soul who'd lost everything. Her walls lowered fractionally, the tension seeping from her shoulders. It's my sister, Maya, she said quietly. She's 15. She just had another surgery, complications from an old injury that won't heal. A cold sense of foreboding tightened my chest. What injury? I asked gently. Her gaze drifted to the empty doorway, her voice distant and hollow. A car accident. 5 years ago. Ice flooded my veins. 5 years ago, the exact night Elena died. I told myself it was a coincidence. Thousands of accidents happened yearly in the city. Still, unease coiled tight in my gut as I steadied my tone. You lost family in it? Sophia nodded, her young shoulders heavy with years of burden. Our parents died. Maya's been fighting for her life ever since, endless surgeries and treatments with no end. She looked back at me, sharp suspicion flaring in her eyes. Why do you care? She asked bluntly. People like you don't stop for strangers having breakdowns. People like me? Wealthy, powerful, untouched by real struggle. She gestured to my attire. You don't know what it's like to fight just to keep your family alive. I stared at her exhausted, grief-lined face. I may not know your struggle, I said softly, but I know what it's like to lose everything. A quiet understanding bloomed between us, two broken souls trapped by tragedy from the same fateful night. Unaware our pain was intertwined, her suspicion softened into sorrow. Loss changes you, she murmured. It ages you before your time, I finished. It leaves scars no one can see. The hospital bustled on around us. But the world felt narrowed to just the two of us, strangers divided by age and status. Bound by matching hollow grief. I studied her trembling fingers, her sleepless dark circles. The quiet strength holding her together. She saw past my wealth and cold facade. Straight to the grieving man beneath. She's going to be okay, I said suddenly. A quiet, unplanned promise. Sophia blinked in surprise. How can you be sure? I held her stormy gaze, and for the first time in 5 years, my frozen heart woke, feeling human again. Because she has you, I said simply. And you're far stronger than you know. The words hung between us. A fragile bridge connecting two worlds that should never have crossed, beneath the shadow of our shared 5-year-old tragedy. I knew nothing in my life would ever be the same. My quiet promise hovered in the hospital air, soft yet unshakable, cutting through the endless hum of monitors and distant footsteps. Sophia stared at me, her storm-gray eyes still glistening with unshed tears, the golden flecks in her irises flickering with unspoken confusion. No stranger had ever looked at her, seen her suffering, and offered simple, unforced kindness, not without pity, not with charity, just genuine belief in her strength. I could read the uncertainty on her face. She was used to fighting alone, used to the world overlooking her quiet persistence, used to carrying every weight by herself. My presence, my words, disrupted the lonely rhythm she'd clung to for 5 long years. Before she could reply, a nurse's brisk footsteps rounded the corridor corner. The woman paused, glancing between Sophia's tear-streaked face and my poised, out-of-place form, her expression softening with quiet sympathy. Miss Hale, she called gently, Maya's out of surgery. She's stable now, moved to the recovery ward. You can see her in 5 minutes once we finish preliminary checks. Relief crashed over Sophia in an instant, sharp and tangible. Her tense shoulders slumped, the rigid strength she'd held for so long finally faltering. A shaky, breathless sigh escaped her lips, and her eyes fluttered shut for a brief second. As if she'd just survived another battle. Thank you, she whispered, voice thick with residual emotion. The nurse offered a faint smile before turning back to her duties. Leaving us in the quiet bubble we'd carved out amid the hospital's chaos, Sophia opened her eyes again. Her gaze drifting back to me, lighter now but still laced with wariness. The crippling fear that had haunted her throughout the surgery had faded, replaced by quiet gratitude and lingering doubt. I don't know why you're here, she said honestly, her tone stripped of its earlier defensiveness. But thank you for staying. Most people would have walked past. I understood that truth all too well. The world was quick to praise strength and abandon vulnerability. Everyone admired survivors, but few were willing to sit with the messy, unglamorous grief that came with survival. Walking past easy pain is how most people live, I replied quietly. I've spent half a decade doing exactly that. I'm tired of it. Her gaze fell once more to my wedding band, the simple gold surface worn thin from years of constant wear. It was a silent declaration of my own endless grief. A secret I wore openly for anyone willing to look. You lost your wife, she said, not a question, but a quiet realization. I nodded, no urge to hide, no urge to fabricate the cold composure I showed the rest of the world. With Sophia, the mask felt unnecessary. 5 years ago, I repeated the timeline, the words tasting heavy on my tongue. An accident, same night as yours. Sophia's breath hitched softly. Her eyes widened slightly, the full weight of our overlapping tragedies slowly sinking in. It was no mere coincidence, no random collision of two grieving strangers. Our darkest nights had been one and the same, bound together by a single fateful evening neither of us could ever forget. That's why you understood, she murmured. You weren't just being nice. You knew exactly what it feels like to lose everything in 1 second. I lifted my gaze to meet hers, every wall I'd built softening at the edges. I knew the hollow emptiness that follows. The way the world keeps turning even when yours has stopped. A fragile, wordless bond settled between us, unforced and unbreakable. We were strangers separated by age, status, and entirely different lives. Yet tethered by a shared trauma that no one else could ever fully comprehend. Sophia wiped the last of her tears, her fingers steadying now. She sat up straighter, the familiar quiet strength returning to her frame, no longer a shield but a quiet anchor. I should go see Maya, she said, hesitation lingering in her tone. She wanted to stay, to unpack this strange connection, but her sister would always come first. You should, I agreed, making no move to hold her back. I had no right to demand more of her time, no right to intrude on the fragile peace she'd just reclaimed. She stood slowly, brushing faint wrinkles from her faded scrubs. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, as if debating whether to leave our brief encounter in the past, a random moment of comfort in a chaotic day. Then she turned back to me. Will you be here when I come back? The question was quiet, almost shy, stripped of all pride. It was a small ask, a quiet plea for a little more grounding in a life that was always unsteady. I did not hesitate. I'll wait. A faint, genuine smile tugged at her lips, the first light thing I'd seen from her. It erased the exhaustion from her features for a split second, softening the sharp edges of her grief, revealing the gentle warmth she'd spent years hiding to survive. With a small nod, she turned and walked toward the recovery ward. Her steps lighter than before, no longer weighed down by soul crippling fear. I remained seated on the hard plastic chair, the sterile hospital air no longer cold or empty. My gaze lingered on her retreating figure, my mind racing with the unshakable pull of our shared history. 5 years ago, Elena had died saving a family whose parents perished, whose young sister was left broken and fighting to live. The pieces clicked into place, slow and devastating, settling heavy in my chest. Sophia and Maya's accident was the one Elena had swerved to avoid, the hero's death everyone had praised. The sacrifice I'd grieved alone for half a decade had saved the two people sitting in this hospital today. It had stolen my wife from me, yet given two fragile lives a chance to keep going. Guilt crashed over me, sharp and unrelenting. Grief twisted into something new, layered and complicated. For 5 years, I'd mourned only my loss, my empty home, my broken future. I'd never stopped to wonder who Elena had saved. Never stopped to see the lives her sacrifice had preserved. Now I was face to face with the answer. I stared at my wedding band, the symbol of my endless sorrow, and finally understood the quiet purpose hidden in my pain. My grief was no longer just loss. It was a silent, unspoken debt. A responsibility. I did not know what Sophia meant to me yet, did not understand why our fates had collided after 5 years of silence. But I knew one truth with absolute certainty. I was not leaving this hospital without making things right. The second Sophia turned toward the recovery ward, leaving me alone in the empty waiting chair, a crushing, irrefutable truth crashed over me in full force, halting every stray thought in my mind. For 5 years, I defined my grief by what I had lost. I'd grieved the empty place Elena left in my bed, the quiet nights spent alone in a towering penthouse built on hollow success, the future we'd planned together that had burned to ash in a single roadside tragedy. I'd clung to my pain like a shield, convinced it was the only remaining piece of her I had left. But in that quiet hospital corridor, surrounded by the faint scent of antiseptic and the distant rhythm of healing, I finally saw the full picture I'd spent half a decade blinding myself to. Elena's death had never been just a loss. It had been a sacrifice, one carved out of pure, unyielding kindness, the very kindness that had defined every part of her life as a surgeon and a human being. She'd swerved that night not out of impulse, but out of instinct. Trained by years of saving lives and rooted in a heart that could never bear to watch others perish, and the lives she'd saved were Sophia and Maya Hale. The realization settled heavy in my chest, layered with a profound guilt I'd never once anticipated. I'd spent years mourning my own suffering, pouring endless wealth into charity foundations in Elena's name, funding hospital research and trauma programs in a futile attempt to honor her memory. I'd thought I was doing everything I could to keep her legacy alive, yet I'd never stopped to ask who her final act of heroism had protected. I'd honored her with money and prestige, but I'd never honored the life-saving choice she'd made in her last living second. I stared down at the worn gold band on my left finger, the metal smooth from 5 years of constant touching, a nervous habit born from endless grief. Once, it had symbolized love and marriage. For years after the crash, it had only symbolized loss. Now it felt like a quiet, unbreakable debt, a responsibility I could no longer ignore. Elena had given her everything to grant 2 young girls a second chance at life. The least I could do was ensure that second chance was never wasted by pain, hardship, or unspoken struggle. I pulled out my phone, my movements slow and deliberate, no longer acting out of routine business urgency but out of quiet, resolute purpose. I dialed my assistant's number, and the call connected instantly, her crisp, professional tone cutting through the hospital's low hum. Mr. Reed. Clear my entire schedule for the next 72 hours, I ordered firmly, leaving no room for negotiation. Push all board meetings, investor calls, and overseas project reviews to next week. Nothing takes priority right now. There was a beat of stunned silence on the line. My schedule was notoriously rigid, my priorities always centered on my corporate empire. No personal matter had ever disrupted my work in 5 years, sir. The cross-border acquisition closing tomorrow is time-sensitive. The investors have flown in internationally, let them wait, I interrupted flatly. Send them my formal apologies and adjust the timeline. I don't care about financial losses or delayed deals. Get it done. I paused, my gaze fixed on the hallway where Sophia had vanished, my resolve hardening with every passing second. Next, contact the chief of surgery at St. Mary's Hospital immediately. Request the complete, confidential medical file for Maya Hale, pediatric recovery patient. I need every surgical report, scan result, complication note, and long-term care plan on my desk, digitally, within the hour. No exceptions, no red tape. Understood, my assistant replied, shifting instantly to efficient execution. No further questions asked, and one final arrangement, I added, my voice softening slightly with quiet urgency. Reach out to the country's top pediatric trauma and rehabilitation team. Fly them in on the company jet, full retainer, unlimited budget. I want them on standby to oversee Maya's full recovery, from post-surgery care to long-term physical and emotional rehabilitation. I want every possible medical advantage available to her. I will coordinate everything immediately, she confirmed. I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my suit pocket. A quiet calm settling over me. Wealth and power had always been my coping mechanism, my way of controlling a world that had shattered my perfect life 5 years ago. I'd used it to build walls, to fill empty silence, to numb the endless ache of losing Elena. Now, for the first time, I would use it for something meaningful, something that aligned with every value my wife had ever held dear, but I knew better than to rush in with unsolicited help. I'd seen the fire in Sophia, the quiet pride and stubborn resilience that had carried her through 5 years of loss and hardship. She'd survived on her own strength, worked herself to the bone to keep her sister alive, and never once leaned on anyone for mercy or handouts. If I offered her money or medical support outright, she would see it as pity, as charitable absolution for a guilt she did not know I carried. It would taint the fragile, genuine connection we'd forged in our shared grief, turning kindness into obligation. So I would wait. I would keep my promise, stay seated in the sterile waiting room, and let her return to me on her own terms. I would be steady, present, and unrushing, something no one had ever been for her in her years of endless struggle. The minutes ticked by slowly, stretching thin between the beep of distant monitors and the quiet footsteps of hospital staff. I did not fidget, did not check my phone, did not let my mind drift back to my empire or my empty penthouse. For the first time in half a decade, I was fully present, anchored to this moment, to the quiet weight of fate that had tied my life to 2 strangers. When Sophia finally reappeared at the end of the hallway, the change in her was palpable. The crushing despair that had shaken her earlier was gone, replaced by a fragile, weary relief that softened every sharp edge of her grief. Her steps were light, unburdened by the terror that had clung to her for hours, and a faint, genuine ease lingered on her features. She'd seen Maya, held her sister's hand, and confirmed the girl was safe and stable after surgery. Her gaze scanned the waiting area, and when she spotted me still sitting exactly where I'd promised to stay, a flicker of gentle surprise crossed her face. It was clear she'd half expected me to leave, to grow bored, return to my busy life, and abandon a casual promise to a grieving stranger. You're still here, she said softly, stopping a few feet in front of me, her voice warm with quiet gratitude. I stood slowly, my tall frame moving with quiet restraint, keeping my tone calm and unassuming. I told you I would be. A faint, tired smile tugged at her lips, the first true light I'd seen from her. Most people don't keep word to someone they just met. Not when they have lives as big as yours. I'm not most people, I repeated, the words holding more weight than she could possibly know. Her gray eyes, streaked with faint leftover tears, studied me carefully, curiosity swirling beneath her quiet exhaustion. She could sense there was depth to my kindness, something beyond simple empathy, but she did not push. After a lifetime of navigating hardship alone, she'd learned to cherish small, genuine goodness without questioning its source. Maya's awake, she shared, her voice softening with sisterly affection. She's sore and worn out from the surgery, but she's lucid. The doctors said they repaired most of the lingering damage from the crash. For the first time in years, they're talking about full recovery, not just temporary relief. There was a quiet disbelief in her tone, a fragile hope she dared not fully embrace. After 5 years of repeated surgeries, setbacks, and crushed optimism, she'd learned to brace for disappointment, never allowing herself to believe in a permanent happy outcome. My chest tightened with quiet certainty. No longer just sympathy, but a rooted resolve. This isn't a temporary fix, Sophia. This is the start of her healing. She's going to get better. She blinked, her walls lowering further, the last of her wariness melting into quiet vulnerability. How can you be so sure? I held her gaze, every lie and pretense falling away, ready to lay bare the truth that had bound our fates for 5 long, silent years. Because there's something you need to know, I said quietly. Something that explains why I understand your grief? Why I care. Her brows lifted slightly. Waiting, and I let the heavy, life-altering truth fall between us. Slow and unflinching, the car accident that killed your parents and injured Maya 5 years ago, my wife Elena swerved to avoid your vehicle. She lost her life that night. Saving yours. The unvarnished truth I'd just laid bare hung thick and suffocating in the hospital's cold, sterile air, quietly erasing every trace of gentle familiarity and fragile comfort that had lingered between us minutes before. All casual warmth faded completely, leaving only the heavy, inescapable weight of fate that had silently tethered our 2 broken lives for half a decade. Time slowed to a sluggish crawl, stretching every second into a breathless, suspended moment. The steady beep of medical monitors, the distant chatter of passing hospital staff, and the soft shuffle of hurried footsteps all blurred into faint, meaningless background noise. In that narrow, quiet corridor, there were no strangers. No fleeting acts of casual comfort, only 2 grieving people bound forever by a single devastating night that had rewritten and shaped both our lives in ways we'd never fully understood. Sophia froze entirely on the spot. Every ounce of fragile relief she'd felt moments prior after Maya's successful surgery vanishing in the blink of an eye. The weary, gentle softness that had settled on her face hardened into blank, stunned stillness, and all remaining warm color drained slowly from her cheeks, leaving her pale and visibly unmoored. Her unique storm-gray eyes widened sharply, the faint golden flecks within them completely clouded by a chaotic, overwhelming mix of pure shock, lingering sorrow, and a sudden, crushing survivor's guilt she had never once anticipated carrying. For 5 long, grueling years, she'd lived with the quiet, gnawing pain of being the lucky survivor, blindly blaming random cruel misfortune for her family's sudden ruin. She'd endured endless exhausting surgeries and painful recoveries for Maya, grieved her parents in total solitude, and pushed through every unimaginable hardship alone, firmly believing her survival was nothing more than a bitter, cruel twist of fate. She had never, not in all her late-night darkest thoughts, imagined it was a complete stranger's selfless, final sacrifice that had spared her and her sister's fragile lives that terrible night. Her slender shoulders trembled faintly beneath her faded, well-worn hospital scrubs, waves of raw, overwhelming emotion rippling visibly through her tense frame. I stood quietly, watching her process the earth-shattering truth piece by painful piece. Every buried memory of hardship, every sleepless late-night struggle by Maya's bedside, every quiet moment of lonely, suffocating grief rearranged itself in her mind to fit this devastating new reality. I'd known this long-hidden revelation would shake her to her core, but I'd deeply underestimated just how thoroughly it would unravel the tough, quiet strength she'd painstakingly built over 5 years of brutal survival. When she finally managed to find her voice through the storm of emotion, it was thin, cracked, broken, and barely audible above the hospital's constant low background hum. Your wife died for us. It was not a question, not a confused inquiry. It was a quiet, devastating, heartbroken confession. Her bleary gaze dropped slowly to her trembling hands, the same hands that had worked countless backbreaking shifts, that had carefully tended to Maya's endless surgical wounds, that had held her sister tight through every medical crisis and fragile recovery. All the stubborn resilience she'd clung to fiercely for years suddenly felt completely unearned and hollow, as if every single breath she'd taken and every step she'd made since that terrible crash had come at the irreversible cost of an innocent woman's precious life. I stepped gently closer to her, my tone steady, soft and grounding, desperate to lift the false, heavy weight of guilt that was settling firmly on her weary shoulders. I could not, would not, let her carry a burden that had never, in any way, belonged to her. Sophia, this is not your burden to carry, I said firmly, my voice calm and resolute. Elena's choice was hers alone, made freely and without hesitation. She was a trauma surgeon. She spent every day of her life choosing to save others, even in the face of impossible danger. That night, she acted on instinct, on the kindness that defined every part of her. She saved your family freely, without hesitation, without regret. My voice softened, laced with the quiet grief I'd locked away for half a decade. No blame belongs to you. No debt hangs over your head. You and Maya were simply the lives she fought to protect. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks, slow and heavy. These were not the desperate sobs of someone overwhelmed by temporary pain. They were the tears of a girl who'd spent years punishing herself for surviving, finally confronting the true cost of the life she'd fought so hard to preserve. I've spent every day trying to be worthy of my parents, she whispered shakily. I sacrificed everything to keep Maya alive. I thought that was how I honored them. But I never knew. Another family lost everything because of ours. Her breath hitched, raw and unsteady. How do you look at me without resentment? I'm living the life your wife died to give. Her words cut deep. But there was no bitterness in my heart, only a quiet, healing clarity I'd never known before. I don't see a reminder of my loss when I look at you, I told her sincerely. I see exactly what Elena died for. I see two girls who refused to give up, who fought to live even when the world broke them. I see the good her sacrifice created. For 5 years, I only grieved what I lost. Today, I finally see what she gained. A faint, fragile calm began to settle over Sophia, the sharp edge of her guilt softening into quiet understanding. She searched my gaze for any trace of anger or regret, finding only honesty and compassion. My phone vibrated discreetly in my pocket, a quiet confirmation from my assistant. Every arrangement was complete. Maya's full medical file was on my desk, and the nation's top pediatric trauma and rehabilitation team was on standby, ready to oversee every step of her long-term healing. What I'd planned as a quiet act of kindness was now a way to honor Elena's legacy. To make sure her final sacrifice would never be wasted. I kept my tone calm and unpressured. Mindful of her fragile emotional state, I've arranged for the best comprehensive medical care in the country for Maya, I said quietly. Top specialized surgeons, personalized long-term physical therapy, professional trauma counseling, and full lifelong rehabilitation support. There are no budget limits, no restrictions, no time limits. Every resource she needs for a full recovery is yours. Sophia's eyes widened, disbelief and gratitude flooding her features, tangled with the fierce independence that had sustained her for years. She had never accepted charity, never let anyone shoulder her burdens, convinced she had to survive entirely on her own. Marcus, I can't accept this, she breathed. It's too much. I have no way to repay you. You don't have to repay me, I interrupted softly but firmly. There is no debt. Only a legacy. Elena gave her life to give your sister a future. Let me help make that future whole and unbroken. I don't want your thanks. I only want her sacrifice to mean something lasting, something good. Sophia fell into a long, trembling silence. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths as she processed everything, the truth of that fateful night, the weight of Elena's sacrifice, and the first genuine, unselfish help she'd ever been offered. For 5 years, she'd carried grief, medical stress, and responsibility alone. Convinced vulnerability and reliance were failures. Now, for the first time, she stood before someone who understood her pain completely, someone bound to her by shared loss. Someone who chose to stay without expectation or condition. The soft ambient hum of the hospital wrapped around us. Gentle and unrushing, framing the fragile, unbreakable bond forming between our two broken lives. After a long, thoughtful pause, Sophia's trembling lips parted. Her voice small and vulnerable, stripped of every last trace of her tough facade. What do we do now? I glanced down at the worn gold wedding band on my finger. 5 years of grief, 5 years of empty loneliness, and finally, 5 years of buried purpose rising to the surface. I lifted my gaze back to her tear-streaked face, to the quiet strength she'd spent so long hiding, and spoke the most honest words I'd uttered in half a decade. Now we heal, I said firmly. Together. The words hung between us like a gentle promise, soft yet unshakable. Now we heal, together. It was a simple phrase, but it rewrote every unspoken rule that had governed my life for half a decade. For 5 years, I'd healed alone, grieved alone, and carried every fragment of Elena's loss in isolated silence. I'd believed my pain was mine alone to bear, that no one could possibly understand the hollow void her death had left behind. But in that quiet hospital corridor, standing across from Sophia, the heavy solitude that had wrapped around me for years finally began to loosen its grip. A faint, tremulous breath escaped Sophia, the last of her trembling tension bleeding slowly from her frame. The tears still lingered on her cheeks, glistening softly under the cool hospital lighting. But the crushing guilt that had shattered her moments earlier had softened into something quieter, more bearable. Grief, yes, but also acceptance. She no longer looked like a girl drowning alone in her pain. She looked like someone who had finally found an anchor after years of drifting aimlessly through storm after storm. The chaotic rush of the hospital resumed around us, seeping back into the empty space we'd carved out for our truth. Monitors beeped steadily down the hallway, nurses moved purposefully between patient rooms, and distant voices murmured in quiet conversation. The world kept turning, just as it had the night of the accident, but for the first time since that fateful evening, I did not feel left behind. I was no longer a spectator watching life move on without me. I was finally stepping back into the current. Slowly and cautiously, but willingly, Sophia lifted her hands, brushing lightly at the lingering moisture on her cheeks, her movements slower and steadier than before. The frantic fragility that had defined her since I'd first spotted her crying in the waiting area was gone, replaced by a quiet, grounded resolve. She met my gaze directly, her storm-gray eyes clear now. The golden flecks no longer clouded by shock or crushing remorse, only a quiet, earnest sincerity that mirrored my own. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted softly, her voice quiet but unashamed. "I've only ever known how to fight alone. I don't remember what it's like to rely on someone, to not carry every weight by myself." Her honesty struck a chord deep within me. It mirrored my own truth perfectly. I'd built an empire on self-reliance, on cold, unyielding independence, convinced that vulnerability was weakness, that needing someone was a flaw. We were two people who had survived tragedy by closing ourselves off from the world. "Who had mistaken loneliness for strength, then we'll learn together," I replied simply. No pressure, no expectation, only quiet certainty. "I'm just as new to this as you are. I haven't let anyone stay close since Elena. I haven't let myself need anyone." A faint, weary smile tugged at her lips, soft and genuine, no longer forced or strained by grief. It was small, barely there, but it transformed her entire face, chasing away the shadows of years of hardship. Two broken people learning to heal side by side. Sounds like a fragile start. "All good starts are fragile," I countered quietly. "Fragile things are the ones worth nurturing, worth holding close." Her smile softened further, and she took a small, steadying step forward, closing the last sliver of distance between us. There was no fear in her movement, no hesitation, only quiet trust. A quiet choice to lean into the connection fate had forged between us, before either of us could speak further. A soft footstep approached, and a young female nurse appeared at the end of the corridor, scanning the hallway until her gaze landed on Sophia. She offered a warm, gentle smile, mindful of the obvious emotion hanging in the air. "Miss Hale," she called softly, "Maya is awake and alert. She's asking for you. You can stay with her for as long as you'd like now. Her vitals are stable, and the sedation has fully worn off." Relief washed over Sophia's features, warm and unburdened this time. After hours of fear, uncertainty, and earth-shattering revelation, she could finally be with her sister, the person who had been her entire world for 5 long years. "Thank you," she whispered sincerely. The nurse nodded gently and stepped away, leaving us in our quiet bubble once more. Sophia turned back to me, her gaze soft and tentative. "Will you come with me? Just for a minute?" The request was quiet, unassuming, stripped of all pride. It was not a demand, not an obligation, only a quiet want. A desire to keep this new, fragile connection alive for just a little longer. I did not hesitate for a single second, of course. Falling into step beside her, I followed her down the quiet corridor toward the pediatric recovery wing. The antiseptic scent of the hospital no longer felt cold and suffocating. It felt like a place of new beginnings, a space where 2 endless griefs were finally beginning to mend. My expensive tailored suit felt less out of place beside her worn scrubs, my guarded billionaire composure melting away with every step I took beside her. As we walked, my phone vibrated once more in my pocket, another update from my assistant. I spared it a quick glance, scanning the brief message. The elite pediatric rehabilitation team had landed in the city, fully prepped and ready to begin Maya's personalized recovery plan first thing the next morning. Every medical record, every specialist consultation, every long-term care arrangement was finalized and in place. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. No need to share the details now. I wanted Sophia to have this moment purely for herself and Maya, unburdened by reminders of my wealth, my influence, or the obligations I'd set aside for them. I wanted her to experience simple peace, the kind she'd been denied for far too long. We paused outside a half-open patient room door, soft warm light spilling out into the hallway. The faint sound of quiet, labored breathing filtered through the crack, gentle and steady, a reassuring contrast to the crisis that had loomed over them all day. Sophia's hand hovered over the door handle for a split second, a quiet nervousness flickering across her face. "She's been through so much," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "She's brave, too brave for her age. She never complains, never lets me see how much pain she's in. I hate that she has to keep fighting." I rested a light, reassuring hand on her shoulder, my touch gentle and steady, no overstep. No pressure, only quiet support. "She fights because she has you," I said firmly. "And now she doesn't have to fight alone anymore. Neither do you." Sophia turned her head to meet my eyes, and in that moment, all the walls she'd built over half a decade of struggle crumbled completely. Her lips curved into a soft, genuine smile, bright and unguarded, the most beautiful thing I'd seen in 5 years. "Okay," she whispered. "Together." With that, she pushed open the door, and we stepped into the quiet warmth of Maya's recovery room, stepping gently into the first peaceful chapter of our long road to healing. The warmth of the recovery room wrapped around us the moment we crossed the threshold, soft and soothing, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile tension that had lingered in the hallway for hours. Dim overhead lights cast a gentle golden glow over the quiet space, chasing away the sharp bleakness of the hospital corridors. The constant, shrill beep of distant monitors faded, replaced by a slow, steady, rhythmic tone from Maya's bedside machine, a calm, consistent sound that felt less like a warning and more like a quiet promise of stability. Lying in the narrow hospital bed, Maya Hale looked small and fragile beneath the thin white blanket, her frame still weakened by hours of surgery and prolonged sedation. Her dark hair fell in loose, messy strands across the pillow, her cheeks pale but no longer sunken with sickness. And 4 lines ran gently from her forearm, and a faint bandage peeked out from the collar of her hospital gown, marking the latest battle she'd fought and won. Even in rest, there was a quiet fortitude in her features. A quiet resilience forged through years of endless struggle and persistent pain, yet her eyes were open, clear, alert, and soft with familiar warmth the second they locked onto Sophia. "Soph," she breathed, her voice hoarse and thin from intubation and long hours of silence, but filled with unshakable relief. In an instant, Sophia stepped forward, every trace of her earlier grief and hesitation melting into pure, sisterly tenderness. She moved swiftly to the bedside, her hands gentle as she brushed the loose hair from Maya's forehead, her touch light enough not to startle the recovering girl. The tough, guarded edge she'd worn all day vanished completely, leaving only the loving, protective older sister she'd been for as long as Maya had needed her. "I'm right here," Sophia murmured softly, leaning down to speak near her ear. "You're okay. The surgery went perfectly. You're safe now." Maya's lips tugged into a faint, tired smile, her gaze clinging tightly to Sophia as if her sister's presence was the only anchor she'd ever needed. "I knew you'd be here. You always are." I paused quietly by the door, lingering in the soft shadow between hallway light and room warmth, not daring to intrude on their intimate, long-awaited moment. This was their peace, their hard-won calm after years of chaos and fear. I was merely a spectator, granted a rare glimpse of the quiet, unbreakable bond that had carried both sisters through every dark day of the past 5 years. Watching them, I understood fully why Sophia had fought so fiercely, why she'd sacrificed every part of her own youth and happiness. Maya was not just her sister, she was her only family. Her sole reason to keep going when every other part of life had fallen apart. It took a few quiet seconds for Maya's curious gaze to drift toward me, her brows lifting slightly with quiet confusion. She had woken up expecting only her sister by her side, not a tall, suited stranger lingering quietly in the dim background. Her eyes, the same soft gray as Sophia's, scanned my tailored suit, my calm, unreadable demeanor, lingering briefly on the worn gold band on my left finger before returning to her sister with silent curiosity. "Who's that?" she whispered, her voice quiet with cautious politeness. Sophia glanced back at me, her eyes softening with a gentle, unspoken warmth that made my chest ache with quiet, unfamiliar tenderness. For a split second, she hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of gentle care, unsure how to explain the tangled, tragic, fated connection between us to her vulnerable, recovering sister. After a small pause, she spoke simply and sincerely, no heavy tragedy, no complicated truth, only gentle honesty. "This is Marcus. He helped me through a really hard day. He's here to support us." There was no need to burden Maya with the weight of Elena's sacrifice, no need to overwhelm her fragile state with the cruel twist of fate that bound our lives. She had endured enough pain for a lifetime. Some truths could wait, reserved for slower, gentler days when her body and heart were strong enough to bear them. Maya studied me for a long moment, her young gaze sharp and perceptive despite her exhaustion. She saw no threat, no pretense, no hidden agenda, only quiet sincerity and steady support. Slowly, tentatively, she offered a small, weary smile. "Thank you for staying with her," she said quietly. "She doesn't have anyone else." The words landed softly in the quiet room, gentle yet devastating. They summed up every lonely year Sophia had endured, every sleepless night, every unshared burden, every tear shed in total solitude. For half a decade, Sophia had been entirely alone in her fight, carrying the weight of Maya's survival and her own grief with no one to lean on. I stepped forward slowly, my movements calm and unassuming, keeping a respectful distance so I would not overwhelm the fragile girl in the bed. My voice was low, steady, and unwavering, carrying a promise I intended to keep for all the years ahead. "She doesn't have to be alone anymore," I said firmly. Sophia's head tilted toward me, her eyes glistening faintly with fresh, gentle emotion, not grief, not guilt, but quiet gratitude, the kind that settled deep in the soul. In that moment, she knew I meant every word. My presence was not temporary, not fleeting, not a one-day act of kindness. It was a permanent choice, a new promise to stand guard over the 2 lives Elena had died to save. Maya's tired eyes fluttered, the exhaustion of surgery finally catching up to her, but her smile remained soft and steady. "That's nice. She deserves someone who stays." Sophia laughed quietly, a soft, breathless sound full of gentle affection, brushing a stray strand of hair from Maya's face. "Rest, baby. You've done enough fighting for today. The younger girl nodded slowly, her lashes falling shut as she sank back into the soft pillows, her breathing evening out into a calm, peaceful rhythm. The tension that had lingered in her small frame for so long melted away completely, leaving her relaxed and at peace for the first time in years. Once Maya was fully settled into light rest, Sophia turned to me, stepping quietly away from the bedside to give her sister undisturbed calm. Her expression was soft, thoughtful, a quiet storm of emotion swirling gently in her gray eyes. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Not wanting to break the room's quiet peace. I shook my head faintly, my gaze steady and tender. There was no need for thanks. This was not a favor, not a charity, not a fleeting kindness. This was healing, mine as much as theirs. I leaned in slightly, my voice lowered to a quiet murmur that barely stirred the air. I meant what I said. You're not alone in this anymore. Not in the surgeries, not in the late nights, not in the grief. Not in anything. Sophia's chest rose and fell with a slow, shaky breath, her walls lowering completely. 5 years of forced independence, of believing she had to carry everything alone, was finally unraveling. For the first time since the crash, she could breathe without the crushing weight of sole responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Outside the room, the hospital continued its endless, busy rhythm. Nurses rotated shifts. Patients rested, staff hurried through hallways. But inside this small, warm room, time moved gently, slowly, peacefully. It was a quiet sanctuary, untouched by the chaos of the world outside. A safe space where grief softened, wounds began to mend, and new hope took root. I stayed for hours, lingering silently in the background, letting Sophia sit by her sister's side, letting them soak in their hard-won peace. I watched the quiet way Sophia held Maya's hand, the gentle way she checked her vitals, the soft smile that never left her face. I watched the calm settle into her bones, replacing the constant tension that had defined her for half a decade. As the evening light outside the hospital windows faded into soft dusk, painting the sky in muted hues of purple and gold, I knew nothing would ever return to the empty, hollow life I'd known. My grief would never disappear entirely. I would always love Elena, always miss her, always carry her memory close. But it no longer had to be the only thing that defined me. Elena's legacy was no longer just loss. It was here, in this quiet room, in 2 brave, beating hearts, in the fragile, beautiful life that was finally beginning to heal, and I would spend every day forward honoring that legacy, by staying. Dusk bled fully into night outside the hospital windows, the soft purple and gold twilight fading into a calm, inky black dotted with distant city lights. The endless bustle of the hospital floor slowed to a gentle hum, the rush of daytime emergencies fading into quiet, routine stillness. Inside Maya's recovery room, the dim warm lighting wrapped around us like a soft blanket, quiet and undisturbed, holding off the cold loneliness that had defined both Sophia's and my lives for far too long. Maya slept soundly in the hospital bed, her breathing steady and unlabored, no longer strained by pain or fear. The tight tension that had lingered in her small frame for years had finally melted away, leaving her looking peaceful, almost carefree, a rare sight for a girl who had known nothing but hospitals, surgeries, and constant uncertainty for half her life. The steady beep of the monitor beside her was no longer a nerve-wracking reminder of fragility, but a gentle, reassuring rhythm, proof that she was healing, that she was safe. Sophia sat on a narrow chair pulled close to the bedside, her elbow resting lightly on the mattress, her fingers loosely curled around Maya's small, slender hand. She'd not once let go since her sister settled into rest. As if constant touch could anchor Maya through every lingering shadow of pain, as if she could absorb every last bit of her sister's suffering through sheer will and devotion. Her shoulders were relaxed now, stripped of the rigid, permanent tension she'd carried for 5 years, and the tired crease between her brows had smoothed out entirely. I leaned quietly against the cool wall by the door, my posture loose and unguarded, no trace of the sharp, authoritative billionaire demeanor I wore in boardrooms and public spaces. My suit jacket hung open, my shoulders relaxed, my mind quiet for the first time in countless nights. There were no urgent calls, no pending deals, no endless list of responsibilities demanding my attention. I'd set aside every fragment of my empire for this moment. For these 2 people who'd unknowingly rewritten my grief and given me a reason to stop merely existing and start living again. For a long stretch of peaceful silence, none of us needed words. The room held a soft, earned calm that felt foreign yet infinitely right, a quiet reprieve from the chaos, loss, and struggle that had chained all 3 of our lives to tragedy. It was Sophia who finally broke the stillness, her voice barely louder than a breath. Careful not to disturb Maya's fragile rest. "I never thought I'd get to see her sleep like this," she whispered, her gaze fixed tenderly on her sister's peaceful face. For years, she'd wake up screaming from nightmares, in pain, or terrified the next surgery would be the one that broke her. I've spent countless nights sitting right like this, waiting for her to breathe easy, waiting for some sign that things would get better. Her tone held no bitterness, only quiet, Exhausted gratitude, the quiet relief of someone who'd fought a war alone and finally tasted victory. I pushed off the wall slowly, moving with deliberate gentleness to stand beside her, my voice lowered to match her soft tone. She's safe now. The worst is behind her. Sophia lifted her gaze to meet mine, her storm-gray eyes glistening faintly in the dim light, no longer clouded by guilt or despair. The golden flecks in her irises shimmered with quiet hope, a light I'd never seen shine so bright in her. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For something to go wrong, for this piece to be taken away. I don't know how to trust good things anymore. I understood that fear completely. Trauma did not just scar the body, it scarred the heart, teaching you to brace for loss even in moments of joy, to anticipate pain even when surrounded by peace. For 5 years, I'd done the exact same thing. Convinced every small happiness would be swiftly ripped away. You don't have to wait for it to fall apart anymore, I said firmly, my quiet voice carrying unshakable resolve. I've made sure of it. The medical team I brought in will oversee every step of her recovery, every checkup, every treatment. There will be no more unexpected crises, no more unmanaged pain, no more fighting alone. Sophia's lips parted softly, her eyes softening with a mix of awe and gentle disbelief. She was used to handling every crisis single-handedly, used to scrambling for resources and fighting for every small chance at healing. The idea of having unwavering, unlimited support was still entirely foreign to her. You've done so much for us, she murmured quietly. More than we could ever deserve. I shook my head instantly, my gaze steady and sincere, refusing to let her fall back into the cycle of unworthiness she'd clung to for years. Deserve has nothing to do with it, I whispered. Elena spent her entire life fighting for people she'd never met, giving second chances to people the world had written off. You and Maya are living proof of every good thing she stood for. Helping you heal isn't charity. It's honoring the woman I loved. It's making sure her greatest sacrifice wasn't in vain. I paused, my gaze drifting down to the worn gold band on my finger, the metal warm against my skin after 5 years of constant wear. Once, it had only symbolized loss. Now it symbolized purpose, connection, and a new beginning rising from old grief. For half a decade, I thought my story ended the night of that crash, I admitted quietly, voicing the truth I'd never spoken aloud to anyone. I thought all I had left was grief, an empty house, and a hollow life built on nothing but work and sorrow. But meeting you, seeing how hard you fought to keep each other alive, it gave my pain meaning. Sophia's breath softened, her eyes glistening with gentle, healing tears. No longer the sharp, agonized sobs of loss, but the quiet release of years of buried loneliness and burden. I used to blame myself every day for surviving, she confessed shakily. I thought I was selfish for breathing when my parents died, for letting Maya suffer just so we could stay alive. I carried that guilt like a weight every single day. She tilted her head up to look at me, her expression open, vulnerable, and unguarded. Every wall she'd built finally crumbled away completely, but knowing Elena chose this, knowing her kindness is why we're here. It makes me want to live better. To live worthy of the life she gave us. I knelt down beside her chair, bringing my eyes level with hers, closing the last fragment of distance between our broken souls. The room was quiet, save for Maya's steady breathing and the faint hum of distant hospital machinery. A perfect backdrop for the quiet vow I made in that moment. Unspoken yet absolute. Then we'll live better together, I said softly. We'll heal together. We'll let her legacy be joy, not grief. Let her sacrifice be the start of something beautiful, not the end of everything good. A soft, radiant smile bloomed across Sophia's face, bright and unguarded, chasing away every last shadow of her years of suffering. It was pure, unfiltered hope, the kind of smile that comes when you finally stop fighting the world and start believing in a better future. She lifted her free hand, hesitating for only a split second before resting it gently over mine, her palm warm and soft against my skin. The touch was light, tentative, and entirely innocent, yet it sent a quiet, steady warmth through my entire chest, melting the last traces of the cold emptiness that had lived in my heart for 5 long years. Outside, the city continued to buzz with quiet nightlife. Strangers living their ordinary, unburdened lives. But inside this small hospital room, time stood still, soft and perfect. 2 people who'd grieved alone for half a decade had finally found each other. Bound by tragedy but no longer trapped by it. We stayed like that for hours. Quiet and grounded, watching over Maya's peaceful rest. No rush, no pressure, no grief weighing us down. Just stillness, healing, and the quiet, unshakable certainty that our lives would never be the same again. The past had broken us all. But the future, we would build together, slowly, gently, and infinitely whole.